Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to yet another edition of the Pure Digital Passion Podcast with me, Moses Kemibaro. My guest today is Peter Maina Muriithi, the General Manager of ALX Africa here in Kenya, where they have 3 campuses that provide tech education to many young Kenyans. And today we're going to have a conversation about Peter's early days, his introduction to the tech space, and more importantly, the amazing advances that ALX Africa is making across the continent and also right here in Kenya. Karibu sana, Peter.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So Peter, before we get started, I always like to start these conversations by getting a little bit of perspective about the person, their background, how they grew up and so forth. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about Peter, going back to your origin story.
Yeah, that's a very difficult question. So, I think there's one time I went for therapy and the therapist was telling me one of the biggest questions that you'll ever struggle with and you're going to struggle with for your entire life is identity. That question of who is Peter. And so whenever I hear that question being asked back, I'm like, you should go and ask my therapist.
Okay.
But I think just to try and answer your question, I don't have a tech background. I started when I went to campus. I studied in marketing. I've always had an interest though in new ideas, right? And so, if I think about, I had very, very early amazing opportunities to get introduced into the tech space. So when I was in second year of campus, I got an opportunity to work for Mama Mike's, which was an online e-commerce.
This is Sagini.
With Sagini, yeah.
Yes.
Sagini was my boss at that time.
Yes.
And if you think about Mama Mike's was founded in the early 2000s.
Correct.
More or less.
One of the original e-commerce platforms in Kenya.
I am 100% sure it was the first e-commerce website in Kenya, right?
Yeah.
And that time they were targeting Kenyans abroad who wanted to buy gifts for their loved ones here. Correct. One of the things that always inspired me about Sagini was that he had actually built the first version of this website, regardless of the fact that he did not have a tech background. So he had a business background, but obviously there was all these tech buzz with the .com thing happening in the early 2000s, and he was actually a self-taught techie, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so he brought me on board when I was still in campus, and I had done CPAs at that point in time, and I was in campus studying marketing, and he brought me on to do accounts.
Okay. So you came in from the accounting side?
I came in from the accounting side.
Fantastic.
But the interesting thing about the business was that it was a very, very small business. We were around 7 or 8 people at that time. And so you got to do everything. So regardless of the fact that I was working in accounting, I got to understand what the techies were doing, with payment integrations, with updating the website. I got to understand the marketing side of the business as well. So it was a whole full 360-degree experience. I used to work sometimes out of the iHub, which those times was really kind of like the epicenter for where, the tech founders at that time were working out of in Kenya. And so it was a really, really good experience, and I got that exposure very, very early on. I've since run away from accounting. I'm more of a marketing person. I thrive in environments where there's free thought. You can problem solve, rather than like typical structured, very, very straight-jacketed environment. And so the accounting background that I do have is very, very useful for me in my day-to-day work today. But I kind of like thrive in environments where you have to problem solve and the problem is not structured, and so you kind of like have to think outside the box in a multidisciplinary way, right? The way I don't like the way there are very many people who think that education is meant to be linear, right?
Correct.
So if you wanted to become a lawyer, you go to school, you study law, you go to the Kenya School of Law, you're admitted to the bar, and that's your path to success. But more and more nowadays, we see, especially in the tech field, we see a lot of people who have very varied backgrounds, right? You see people who've done marketing, people who've done accounting, people who've done public relations. And then they get into tech. And it's not that they don't use that knowledge or information that they have from what they studied, is that they bring all these things together to be able to actually deliver solutions in the most complicated of situations. And so I think naturally I've always gravitated towards being a generalist.
Yes.
And so I've like picked things here and there from different places, and that's kind of like defined who I am today.
Great. So I know that you're Mama Mike's, but I think at some point you also had a stint with McKinsey. Maybe you can tell us about that and how that happened.
Yeah, I got into McKinsey straight out of campus. It was a very, very interesting experience. Obviously, I went to the University of Nairobi and I did BCom. For those of us studying business at that point in time, McKinsey was the dream. So they had just come into the market at that point in time. They were making their first hires. I think 90% of my class applied to
Wow.
the super rigorous process to actually get in. I was lucky. I was among the first 4 people to get hired into the Nairobi office. And McKinsey was interesting in the sense that, you know, a big chunk of what we do is problem solving.
Yes, correct.
And so as a young consultant, you don't get to specialize, you don't specialize on industry or you don't specialize in a particular practice. So the way McKinsey is structured, it's structured across multiple industries. So you have experts, for example, in banking, you have experts in insurance,
correct,
oil and gas.
Across the verticals, yeah?
Across the different verticals, but also you have experts across the functional specialization. So you might have an HR specialist or an organizational structure specialist, or you might have a corporate finance specialist.
Correct.
Right? And sometimes you have people who actually specialize in a cross-section of 2 of these specializations. So you might find a guy who's an expert in banking,
yes,
but an expert at risk management. Right? So it's a very niche type of work. But then, as a young consultant, you get exposed to all these things.
So you see everything across the board.
So you might do a 3-month project where you're doing organization restructuring, then you're thrown into another 3-month project where you're doing digital transformation, then you're thrown into another thing. And so the primary muscle that you're trying to build at that point in time is problem solving, because the methodology is the same across, regardless of whether the problems are in oil and gas or whether they're in banking. At that point in time, your value is not in your industry expertise, but it is in your problem solving capacity. Your ability to break down problems into its constituent parts and think structurally around it, come up with hypotheses, test them, see what makes sense, what doesn't, iterate. And so these are some of the interesting, I would say, skills that I picked up when I was at McKinsey, which are very, very valuable outside of McKinsey, outside of consulting, regardless of industry, regardless of sector, regardless of whatever problem it is that you're trying to solve.
Now, once upon a time, I read a book called The McKinsey Way. I'm not sure if you ever read it yourself.
I've heard of it, but I haven't read it.
And it's written by some ex-consultants from McKinsey, but they talk about the methodologies, the frameworks, which I actually adopted myself at some point. But very brilliant how they're sort of able to distill issues into sort of the most basic constituent parts and then use that as the foundation to build a solution. So basically remove all the ambiguity, get to the heart of an issue and solve it. So I imagine that serves you well based on that. So I'd like to sort of switch gears and now come to ALX. Maybe you can give us a bit of a backstory. What is ALX? Where does it come from? What problem does it solve? And what exactly does it do?
So ALX is part of the Africa Leadership Group. You might be aware of the Africa Leadership Academy, which was founded by Fred Swanik in the early 2000s.
I know Fred, yes.
Fred. And so his original vision, which hasn't changed, since then, was basically to create the next generation of African leaders who will actually transform the continent, right? There was kind of like disappointment with what had happened after, the 60s when most African countries got decolonized.
Yes.
And there was a lot of euphoria around, this is our time for transformation. We're really going to transform the continent. You're going to get a lot of people getting into, wealth and prosperity, very different from what had been there before, which was a very 2-class type of state. But that didn't change. And so there was that disenfranchisement where, we realized, or rather Fred realized that, look, it's true, we did change leadership, but nothing really changed fundamentally. And so the original vision for the Africa Leadership Academy was really to get the top minds out of all high schools across the continent, to get into this academy, give them world-class education, and hopefully get them access to Ivy League universities, and then get them, once they finish, to come back to the continent and give back their time to the continent. And so that's the original birth story of the Africa Leadership Group. Fast forward, obviously, the African Leadership Academy was very expensive to run. They could only take a cohort of 60 people every year, and it didn't seem like a scalable model. And so one of the things that within the group we thought of doing was starting the African Leadership University, which was meant to basically do the same thing, but rather than send people abroad to study, have that similar world-class education experience here on the continent.
Correct.
And so the African Leadership University was started, and the idea was, have a campus in Rwanda, have a campus in Mauritius, and give that same world-class university education to a larger number of Africans, right, who couldn't afford to go to the US, or we couldn't sponsor to go to the US, and have that transformation that way. But then we also run into the exact same challenge with ALA in the sense that, how many people can you send to a campus in Rwanda every year? Maybe 200, 300 max. But we want to transform the entire continent. And so we had to look for a vehicle that allowed us to get to a bigger number of people faster, and give them the same world-class type education and the same leadership ethos so that they could transform the communities where they lived in. And that's kind of like where ALX was birthed, right? And so if I'm to think about what our mission at ALX is, our mission right now is to build or to create 2 million ethical and entrepreneurial leaders by 2030, right?
That's massive.
So that's massive. So it's you're creating quality people. You're giving them quality education, right? But it's not just education in software engineering or education in data science, but it's infused with leadership principles. These people need to transform the communities where they're in, regardless of what course or program that they do. But we are also scaling that massively. So it's not, a couple hundreds every year, but you're talking about thousands every year, right? We need these change agents everywhere, in every corner of the continent. And so our mission right now is to really create those 3 million ethical and entrepreneurial leaders across the continent. And our focus is primarily on tech, right? We're thinking, tech is really driving all sectors of our economy and driving government today.
Correct.
And so it's important for these leaders to kind of like grow up in that area where, tech is native to them. When they're thinking about solving problems in healthcare, when they're thinking about solving problems in education, right? When they're thinking about entrepreneurship and building businesses and creating jobs, it's within the framework of tech. Tech is an enabler to all that.
Correct.
So that's how we think about it.
It cuts across everything.
Exactly.
Correct. So what is the size of ALX at this point in time? I know, for instance, in Nairobi, you've got several campuses, others in other markets. What is the sort of the footprint, so to speak?
So we operate across the entire continent, but you do have a physical presence in 8 African countries.
Okay.
So we're in Kenya, South Africa, Egypt, Morocco, Nigeria, obviously, one of our biggest markets, Ghana, Rwanda, and Ethiopia.
Okay.
And we do have campuses in those 8 markets. So totally, across the 8 markets, we have a total of 29 campuses.
Okay, wow.
In Kenya specifically, we have 3. And so the way we've structured these campuses is, it's not your typical traditional type of university campus where there are lecture halls and there's a library and, there are professors who come and teach. Most of our courses are delivered in an online way, but we try and create a hybrid experience where, students can come to the spaces. They've been set out as a co-working space. If they just want a quiet working space with access to fast internet, they can come and use the space for that. They have a lot of group work and projects that they have to work on together, so they can come to this space, to meet their peers, to meet people from the same cohort, work on projects together. We have quite a number of events that we run in the spaces.
Okay.
Be they master classes, be they fireside chats with industry leaders. So we really give them an opportunity for them to network amongst themselves, but also to network with people in the ecosystem, right? And so the learning is really learning by doing. You don't learn, it's not a theoretical space where you take notes, you cram, you do an exam and you pass and that's that. You're constantly building, right? And it's learning by doing. So if you're doing software engineering, from the first week, you're building stuff, right? And so you have to put yourself in an environment that kind of like mirrors what you're going to be doing in the workplace. And so that means working in teams. That means coming to a physical space once in a while to figure out how do we do this. That means presenting your project or your idea to another group of peers so that they can give you feedback. It does mean pitching your idea to a potential investor. And so it really forces you to come out of your shell and stop thinking about this as an academic thing. But it's a real life thing that is actually preparing you for what you're going to have to face in the workplace.
What is the entry point in terms of, do you bring in mostly high school graduates? Do you have to have a university degree to take up a program? And then how long does one program typically take for one to finish?
Yeah. So currently we are targeting people between the ages of 18 and 34 years.
Okay.
Youth,
so to speak.
And anyone of African origin. Those are the only 2 conditions we put for people who come into our programs. You do not have to have a university degree to get into our programs. You don't need to have finished high school to get into our programs.
Oh, really? Even? Okay.
Yeah. So our programs they're not easy to do, right? And so what we usually tell our learners, the people who are interested in ALX, is as long as you're smart enough and you have the grit and you can work through it, you can go through ALX. Because people come from multiple backgrounds. You have people who never finished, campus, for example, because they didn't have school fees. or for whatever circumstances, maybe they got enrolled in the wrong program. I went to do chemical engineering, and midway I realized this was not my thing. And so in a traditional school or work environment where you'd be penalized for not having those papers, but you're actually smart enough. For us, we have a very open mentality towards it. Our tagline is actually do hard things, right?
Yeah, I saw that.
so the only requirement you really need is, ability to do hard things, or the mindset of doing hard things. But we really try to lower the barriers of entry so that as long as you're smart enough and you're tenacious enough, you can get into an ALX program.
So typically, does one need to pay to enter?
Some programs you need to pay. So we do have a program that's fully sponsored. So currently, we are running an AI Career Essentials program.
Oh, fantastic.
Which is fully sponsored.
Uh-huh.
So there are no fees required for that. And then we have a bunch of other tech programs. So we have back-end web development, we have front-end web development, we have a data science program, a data analytics program, which have an admin fee attached to them, right? So they are still sponsored, but partly sponsored, right? So the admin fee ranges from $150 to $300, depending on which program it is that you select.
For the entire thing?
For the entire thing.
Wow.
So obviously it's quite subsidized, but there is that admin fee that learners have to pay.
And typically, how long do the programs take?
It also depends. It varies from between 5 months to a year, right?
Okay.
So their data analytics course is the shortest one. It takes 5 months. And then we have our AWS cloud front end or back end, which take about 6 months. And then our longest program is the data science one, which takes a year.
Okay. So what happens? So somebody comes in, I'm a young guy, I've done my 6 months or 1 year, whatever program I took, or maybe somebody also can take multiple courses as well. But let's just say at the end of a year, somebody is market ready, are they employable? What happens next?
So typically what we try to help the learners do is also to package themselves. So a lot of the things you learn at ALX, you learn a lot of soft skills, right? What we call the meta skills, the 7 meta skills, which is a legacy of what we've been teaching at ALA, and it's also a legacy of what we've been teaching at ALU. So remember, you're not just teaching or training tech professionals, but you're creating ethical and entrepreneurial leaders.
Yes.
So, regardless of whatever program that you choose or that you're going through ALX, the first 2 months you spent doing what we call the ALX foundations, which focuses on these 7 meta skills. So if you think about the meta skills, number 1 is leading self, right? So
okay, wow.
Self-leadership, right? So you can't lead others if you can't lead self. And so the typical things that you learn when you're doing leading self is, morning pages. We ask them every day, wake up in the morning and write whatever is on your mind, whatever is bothering you, or whatever interesting ideas that you have. We call them morning pages. It's really meditation and journaling, right? So we really get them into that space where they are reflective and they're contemplative and they're thinking. And it really forces them to also search deep in within them and figure out what it is that they actually want out of themselves and what they want out of life, right? Within that leading self, we also encourage them to do physical exercises. So make sure that you do this every morning, right? And so a lot of these things help you really to reflect about your mission in life. They also help you to regulate your emotions, to manage rest and all these things, which is really critical for you to be able to manage others. You can't take care of other people if you cannot take care of yourself. So that's one core meta skill. We teach them, leading other people, right? What does that entail? You have to be empathetic. You have to learn how to relate to other people, right? See their point of view. Interact with different types of opinions. Critical thinking, very, very important in today's world, where there's an information barrage. You get all sorts of data points from all different places. We have the deep fakes and the fake news.
There you go.
And so how do you sift through these tons and tons of data and be able to form an opinion for yourself about what you actually think? A lot of times we think we have our own opinions, but the reality is our opinions are shaped by people who we value or people who will hold up in high esteem.
Yeah.
So what is your capacity for example, if I voted for a particular politician, what is your capacity for saying, look, I voted for this guy, but I do not agree with him on this particular issue, or I have a different opinion in this other particular issue. Just because I voted for them, or just because we come from the same place, does not mean that I have to agree with everything that they say.
Correct.
And so you really need that capacity for being able to break things down, being able to source for different sources of information, and make an informed opinion by yourself. So that's critical thinking, which they actually learn. Quantitative reasoning is another core meta skill that they learn, right? How do I make decisions based on data? How do I structure data? How do I present that data? How do I tell a story using that data? and how do I form opinions and make decisions out of that data. And that's a skill that cuts across industry, it cuts across professions. As long as you're a manager and in a position of leadership and you have to make decisions, whether you're in government, whether you're in corporate, even in your house, right?
Correct.
You need to make decisions as to, am I going to buy this soap or this other soap? Am I going to take my kids to this school or this other school? Based on data, right? And so that's a very, very critical skill. We take it for granted and we think we're data driven, but the reality is a lot of us make decisions based on our gut feelings. And so it's very important for us to get into that mindset and mentality of making decisions out of data. Another core meta skill we actually take them through is entrepreneurial thinking. Are they aware or alive to the opportunities that there are around them in the environment? Can they see the problems in the environment and think this is an opportunity? I can actually solve this. I can actually build a business out of this. A lot of people who graduate from our programs do not necessarily want to be employed. They want to build businesses. And so it's important for them to develop that aptitude, for them to be able to see around and see opportunities, see what other people are doing, find something that, they can add value and, get through a structured process for actually creating something, right? So if I have an idea, how do I refine it? How do I present it in front of people? How do I build a prototype?
And I think that sort of articulation is important because presumably when they go into the workplace or maybe entrepreneurial land and decide that they want to do a startup, how they unpack and share their ideas is so critical. And I have been involved in the past in startup pitches and competitions, and it's one of the weakest areas I've seen where somebody's clearly intelligent and capable, but they're not able to articulate it well enough.
Exactly. And one of the meta skills we actually take them through is communicating for impact. Right? And so, if you think about the elevator pitch, right? The elevator pitch is basically how do you package your complex idea or your complex solution into a 2-minute pitch that someone will understand, someone who's not even of your industry or someone who's not tech savvy.
Correct.
Right. And so I've seen a lot of people think, and it's the common practice in education, where a professor will ask you a question and then maybe you're writing an exam and you might think the more you write, the more correct of an answer you have. But sometimes all you need is 3 sentences and you've answered the question, and it's the capacity for synthesis. It's something that I also learned in my life as a management consultant when I was at McKinsey.
Yes.
Right? If you're doing a project and you're helping a CEO think about something and you've done 3 months worth of work, you've developed 500 pages worth of content, and he just asks you, so what do I need to do? You need to be able to synthesize all that you've done in a couple of sentences to help him see this is the problem and this is the possible solution, right? And it's not the fact that you can synthesize it in one paragraph does not belittle the amount of work that has gone into it, but you need to be able to learn how to synthesize all that and communicate it in a very fast and impactful way. So what you're saying is really true, right? And it has happened to me as well. I've seen people come up with pitches and, it's a deck that's full of text. And it really takes you a lot of time before you really understand or get to the bottom of what this person is saying. And so that ability to synthesize and communicate very complex concepts in a very fast way and very impactful way is a very powerful skill.
We also live in a world today where, everything has become snackable. It's almost the TikTokification of everything, where people want things in light, easy to consume nuggets, so that you get straight to the heart of an issue as opposed to something elaborate. Again, that's I think a human behavior that's becoming more and more the digital way of things these days, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, but so it's a good thing.
Yes.
But it's also lamentable.
Yes.
So I do feel like there is also a space for a much lengthy discourse. So, for example, you think about literature, for example, right? It's becoming increasingly difficult, as you mentioned, this TikTokification of things. That's a new word I've learned today.
Yeah.
So we're seeing more and more often, the more time we spend on social media, the more time we spend, consuming very small bits of data, it really reduces our capacity for deep work and for deep thinking and for deep reading, right? And so there will be times when you need to really put your head down and focus for lengthy periods of time on one thing, just for you to understand a concept, right? So think, for example, artificial intelligence, right? So you have a lot of people, you have a lot of consumers for AI products. So a big chunk of people in the workplace today are using ChatGPT. right? It's super easy to learn how to use. It's super easy to learn how to do prompt engineering to get value out of it. But think about the engineers behind these large language models.
Yeah.
Think about the kind of work and the kind of research they have put through the years
To make this work,
to make this work. Like it's a lot of deep work and it's a lot of deep thinking. And so it's kind of like the pendulum swings to the other side where you have a bunch of people who are creating a ton of value, but then they're not living in this TikTok type environment where it's small bits of information and across multiple fields, multiple sectors, and
Correct.
your attention is constantly moving from one thing to another. But they've actually put their heads down and thought about one thing for a really long time, right? So I'd say it's really both things, right? We're living in a world of a lot of information that is actually very valuable to us, but we also have to be able to find a balance and find those times for this deep work and deep information, deep reading,
yes.
That actually creates value.
Yeah. So ALX talks about having a future-proof curriculum. Can you tell us a little bit about what that actually means?
Yeah. So we try to think about education from first principles. What is it for exactly? And if you think about, what people actually do in the workplace, the primary thing that they do is solve problems, right? You run a marketing agency and you might ask yourself, what do you guys do, right? Do you create advertisements? Do you create copy, right? Do you run ads?
We do all of that.
You do all those things.
Yes.
But fundamentally, what you're doing is solving problems.
Well, we're helping our clients sell more product and service. That's
Exactly.
the fundamental one.
Exactly. So for me as ALX, I'll come to you and say, hey, I need to recruit 100,000 people into my programs this year. Figure out how. So then you have to figure out the how.
Correct.
Right? So you'll undergo through a very lengthy process which will will run ads.
Yeah.
But then the question is, you have to think about the problem for first principles. First and foremost, is there even a market for this? Where is that market? How do I find that market? Is this a product that this market is interested in the first place?
You have to validate all this. Yeah.
Exactly. What kind of messaging is going to resonate with this market?
Correct.
And so you have a whole bunch of skills around problem solving that have nothing to do with copywriting, that have nothing to do with creating images or creating ads.
Correct.
Right? And so when you think about creating future-proof careers, it's this base skill set. If you think about the meta skills, it's the critical thinking, quantitative reasoning, essentially problem solving that is applicable across industry, across different types of work that you really need to get. The other very important skill that we teach at ALX, which I think really future-proofs a lot of people's career, is learning how to learn, right? And so the fundamental element is, we give our learners a lot of content. Our learning philosophy is 70-20-10. Where 10% of what you learn is structured content, and then 20% you learn from your peers through the work that you have to do with them and the feedback that you get from them, and then 70% is you learn by doing, right? And so if you have to build a website, for example, if you ask you build a form of Airbnb, there's a ton of research that you have to do. You have to go and figure out, are there other Airbnbs out there? What features do they use? How have they built this? How have they built that? And so especially in the tech space, where things move so quickly, if you're a computer scientist, for example, if you're a dev and you're building today and you have 5 years worth of experience, most likely the knowledge you're using to build today, like you've really built upon it from what you studied from campus 5 years ago.
Correct.
You've gone on learning. And so the important thing here is not the static piece of information that you learned in campus 5 years ago, is that you're given the fundamental principles and you have a certain framework that allows you or enables you to continue learning over time. So that learning to learn is a really, really core skill, which I think we give at ALX and really helps people to navigate or adapt to whatever environment, whatever technologies come in future. Today, we are raving about artificial intelligence. Tomorrow it will be about something else. And so if things are changing so quickly, it doesn't mean that just because I'm an expert at this thing today, I'm going to be okay in 10 years. No, I need to be able to keep abreast with what's happening. I need to be able to learn the new things in the industry. And so that's really one of the core things that we emphasize at ALX. And I think by the mere methodology, the learning philosophy that we have really prepares our learners to be able to learn by themselves.
So what you're saying is that it's inherently not just linked to the actual curriculum in terms of the modules, whether it's data science or AWS cloud, but more importantly that the underlying, shall we call it, the foundational aspects of the curriculum at something that you can translate to other future learning experiences.
Exactly. It's the mindset as well. And if you think about entrepreneurship, or if you think about problem solving, that's really what it is, right? So what we are trying to do, so for example, we are trying to really scale massively what we're doing, and our objective for this year is to train 100,000 people in Kenya. It's never been done before.
Wow.
So there's no roadmap, there's no template, there's no playbook, because nobody has ever done it before.
Yeah.
And so we kind of like have to think about it from first principles. We have our own hypotheses about how this is supposed to be done. We go out to market, we test, we see what works, what doesn't. Whatever works, we continue doing. Whatever doesn't work,
We stop doing that. Yeah.
right? And so that's why, like, internally, our company motto is do hard things, because we're like, we haven't done this before, but we want to do it. It's a noble aspiration. Let's figure out how to do it. And so that's the kind of mindset we're also trying to get the learners into. Look, just because you haven't been taught how to do something doesn't mean you can't do it.
That's profound. And especially, I think, you imagine children coming from different, or young adults coming from different economic situations and all. Some of them may be very underprivileged. It must be very transformative for some of them in terms of then seeing those enormous possibilities because of adopting this framework or this mental model of being able to do these hard things, right?
Yeah, it's very transformative. It's transformative for us who work at ALX, but we've seen students come in, first week they're super shy. They barely want to talk to anyone. They can barely speak in public. They've never spoken in front of more than 3 people.
Wow.
And then by the time 6 months is over, they have their idea. They're pitching their idea in front of hundreds of people. They've really refined how they speak in front of people. They're very, very compelling. They're passionate about what they do. Just seeing that transformation, regardless of whether they've studied software engineering or AWS cloud or whatever it is. Just seeing that human transformation. It's very, very impactful. The
confidence and so forth. Maybe you can share a few stories of some of the individuals who've come through here and where they've gone and what has happened to them. Do you have any experiences or memories of people who've come through here who have essentially changed their lives?
I mean, there are very many stories, but I think the ones that are super, super impactful for me, or rather I've heard those stories and I'm like, wow, this is amazing. There was once a student, a lady who was doing medicine from the University of Nairobi.
Okay.
So they were in second year, they were doing medicine, doing very well, but they'd always had this interest in tech. And they're like, I think I need to somewhat get into the tech space, right? I want to do medicine, but something also related to tech. So when she got in touch with ALX, she was like, this is my thing. So she took a sabbatical from her medical degree, came to ALX, did the 1-year software engineering program. Just for context, the software engineering program by ALX for the last a year requires you to dedicate 70 hours a week.
Wow.
Right, because the way it had been designed, it was originally designed for people who, they're in a different profession or different career. Say they've done business or they've done public relations and they want to get into tech. And you don't want to go to uni and spend 4 years doing computer science for you to get into tech.
I get you.
And so it's just this 1-year sabbatical, you block everything out, you focus on it and you do it. So she signed up for the software engineering program and she finished. She graduated mid last year. Right. And then she's going back to medical school and, she's presented. So when she was doing the software engineering program, she came up with a startup idea. Yeah, so she had this idea. She was like, she's still trying to figure it out, right? So she's like, look, I need to be able to offer good quality medical services to the biggest number of people, right? And I cannot multiply myself. And so I need to be able to leverage tech for me to do this. And so when she went through the ALX program, that's really what she had in mind. And she's been developing ideas around this. And so the reason why I find this to be super, super interesting is because this person, she's actually gone back to medicine school. Right?
Oh, okay.
And
finish her medical degree. Okay.
Exactly. But she has a software engineering background. So when she finishes, she's really, in the right mental space and with the right skills to think about health tech and to think about what types of solutions can really accelerate the kind of work that she's doing. And that's not the first time we've seen this. We've seen this with people across multiple industries. And so for me, I think, the impact that ALX has had on learners is really that opening up their minds to think, regardless of my background, regardless of what I've done, how can I think about leveraging tech to solve problems? one of the interesting things that we actually do for our learners when they're going through the ALX Foundations course is that we encourage them to think about what their mission is. We say it's about missions and not majors. When you go to campus and like for me, I went and did business. I did BCom, and then I specialized in marketing. So marketing was my major, right?
Correct.
And so the way we encourage learners to think about what they do, we encourage them to think about missions and not majors. And so we have this thing we call 7 grand challenges and 7 grand opportunities in Africa. And so if you think about the 7 grand challenges of Africa, whether it's healthcare or education or urbanization or governance, right? There are very many areas where you can think this is a problematic area on my continent. I can actually develop a solution around this space. We also help them to think about the grand opportunities. What are the big opportunities or assets that Africa has? If you think about tourism, for example, if you think about our demography, the fact that we have a lot of young people, and how do you link these grand challenges and grand opportunities to find your niche, to find what it is that you're passionate about? And so I'll give you an example. Last week we were having some presentations at one of our hubs at Nation Center where our learners were presenting the projects that they are working in. So these are people who cut across some of them are doing data science, some of them are doing software engineering, some of them are doing data analytics. And you had this gentleman who came and presented an idea. He actually came with physical ornaments and presented to us, and he asked us to guess what these ornaments were made from, right? And they looked very beautiful. Some of them were earrings, laces and whatnot. And eventually he explained to us that he actually makes those things from waste. So it's recycled from waste, right? So it's basically creating something ornamental, something beautiful from something that would have otherwise ended up in a landfill and polluted the environment, right?
Yeah.
And this is a guy who's doing data analytics, and he's thinking, how do I solve the problem of pollution in the environment where I live, right? So it's very impactful to see these stories of guys who are doing all sorts of different programs, but they're really thinking, how do I solve a particular problem where I am, right? And so some of the feedback that you were giving him, were like, okay, fine, this is a very good idea. Some of the things that you can think about is, create a marketplace for this online. Think about how you can access foreign markets, the US and in Europe, where people will really resonate with these stories of recycling things from waste and really having an impact on our carbon footprint and on our society.
Exactly.
So it's really combining these things from different places. His passion for tech, his passion for the environment, trying to make a difference where he's coming from, to really build something, of value and something sustainable.
That's such a nice departure from the historical thing. I think in Kenya we used to call it papers. You have to get papers, which is then your ticket to the best job out there, but rather thinking about having more impact around societal issues, and also again impacting the entire continent in different ways. I have to ask this question because I think when I think about education, and I have been involved in the education space because I've been working with MasterCard Foundation on the EdTech EdTech show that we have here in Kenya on NTV. But more importantly, I think there's always this issue and challenge around, those who are underserved, communities and people who traditionally may not get opportunities, let's say, to be a part of something like ALX, and yet they're brilliant academically. Maybe they just have socioeconomic challenges, they don't have the money. How are you solving for that? The people who may traditionally not make it into a place like this, how do you handle that particular challenge?
Yeah, so we have a couple of programs running, or a couple of things that we've done to support, people who might be struggling from a social economic perspective. So a couple of years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, we realized that a lot of people who signed up for a software engineering program were dropping out, either because they didn't have a laptop or they didn't have access to an internet. They were working from home, right? And so people come from different backgrounds, right? So you may find, someone is coming from a very, very privileged background where they have their own bedroom, they have their own quiet space. They can work for a full day with minimal interruptions.
Yes.
But then you find someone else, they're living in a bedsitter, for example.
Correct.
Where they're sharing the same space with maybe 2-3 other people. And so if you tell this person, look, you need to dedicate 40 hours a week to studying this thing, it's very difficult, right? They have people around them, they have to take care of them. The TV is on all the time. They have kids running around and stuff like that. And so one of the big things that we did last year was open these hubs, right? We currently have 3 hubs in Nairobi. and they've been set up as co-working spaces, and it's basically an environment where we give you access to high-speed internet, and we give you a quiet space. If you just want to like come out of that environment and come here, spend time just working and get your stuff done and learn, you can actually do that, right? A lot of our programs, one of our programs currently is already fully sponsored. So it's actually free and everybody can go through it if they wanted.
Okay.
And the other tech programs, as I mentioned earlier, they're also significantly subsidized, right? The one challenge that we have seen though, right, is, one of the requirements that we give to our learners is that they have to have access to internet. Obviously, you're offering them internet here, but they also have to have access to a laptop. So we've been in conversations with a couple of partners to see where we can get help, but obviously we are very open, to partners who can come in and say, look, I'm going to sponsor X number of students and give them laptops, because that's currently what we are seeing is that's one of the big barriers, right? Like if you're just working out of a phone or a smartphone, it's really hard to engage with the content and to do your work. And so, we're really looking for people we can partner with who can, offer access to some of this infrastructure that will help people to get in. And yeah, we are very, very open to working with other people in that front.
But then again, your program is also highly subsidized. I mean, if you went to market rate internationally, you wouldn't be able to get this kind of education at that price, would you?
It's extremely subsidized. So if you have to think about, do I go to uni or do I go to college or do I do an ALX program? It's extremely affordable in that sense.
So thinking about the world and technology, and I think, where we are today, what are some of the most in-demand tech skills or tech education that you're seeing right now? What is the market needing that is sort of in the programs that you offer today? How are you aligned to those requirements? And of course, going forward into the future?
Yeah. So I think there's always been a demand for software engineering. So if you think about front-end web development, there's a ton of demand there. Back-end web development, there's a ton of demand there. A new area where it's not so new, but you're seeing a ton of demand in as well is data. You're seeing a lot of demand for people who have basic skills in data analysis. You're seeing a lot of demand in people who have
interpretation,
done data science as well, because as systems get more digitized, as people move more to the cloud, as people work more out of websites and applications, there's all this data that's available, and companies are trying to figure out, or they're trying to make sense out of this data. They're trying to get to a point where their decisions are more data driven. And so there's a lot more demand for people who can come and make sense out of this data. So there's a demand for people who can actually set up the infrastructure. So this is how you have to set up your cloud. This is how you have to collect your data. This is how you have to collect, annotate it and whatnot. So there's kind of like that basic data infrastructure. But there's also people who understand the business. They understand the needs of the business, and they understand what kinds of data will be most valuable to the business, right? And they can connect the two, right? So they can inform the engineers and say, look, I need my data organized in this way and this way and this way, because this is these 5 matrices are the most impactful for this business. And so I know you're collecting 1,000, and that's nice, but I want my dashboard to look like this, because this is what will have the most impact to my CEO or to my exco, right? So we are seeing a lot of demand for those type of roles as well, where managers know that they need to make data-driven decisions, but they need help to figure out how to structure the data and present it in a way that it facilitates decision making.
That's like that saying, data for data's sake is almost useless. It's that insight that you acquire from the data that's most important.
Exactly. You have to move from information and data to insight, right?
Yeah.
So then what's the so what of the data? Fine. You have all these data points, but so what?
Yeah. So what's the way forward in terms of, I come here, I do a year, I'm now qualified, and presumably by the end of this year, you'll have 100,000 Kenyans of this nature. What happens next to them? Do you put them into some other programs? Do you help them seek employment? Do you help them get into entrepreneurship opportunities, perhaps? Yeah. How do these young Kenyans then enter the market and start to be productive?
Yeah. So we have 3 different pathways for our graduates. So first and foremost, we do run an alumni community, which we call the ALX Fellowship. So basically, once you've graduated from the ALX program, you're part of this community for life, right? And you continue to invest in your development, your professional development. So we have a series of master classes, we have a series of fireside chats, we have events, where you get to network with people in the industry and whatnot. And so there's continuous learning within the fellowship to begin with. But then there are 3 typical pathways that our graduates follow. You'd have people who would want to go and work for your Microsoft and your Google and for other companies. And so one of the benefits of the ALX fellowship is that we really help you to position yourself and brand yourself, right? We usually tell our learners that you're your best brand ambassador. You're your best salesperson. And so if you want to get that job at a Google or at a Facebook or whatever it is, don't look at me to get it for you. I'll give you the tools that you need to be able to get it. So in addition to the world-class education that you've gotten, obviously, there's the personal branding element. How do you position yourself in the marketplace? How do you, update your LinkedIn profile in a way that makes sense? How do you present yourself at interviews? How do you sell what you do, right? So those are some fundamental skills that they actually learn to improve the chances of them getting a job, right?
Okay.
So a lot of the guys who graduate from our programs get jobs by themselves, right? So that's one of the things that we do. Number two, we are building a tech consulting company where we are going to be serving, companies in the US and in Europe, helping them in their with their tech challenges, right? So if it's digitalization of records, for example, or if it's building applications or whatever it is, it's really thinking about what end-to-end tech solutions do some of these businesses need, and can they leverage the talent that we have here in Africa to actually deliver solutions for those. But obviously, that will only hire a very, very small fraction of the guys who graduate from our programs, right? A lot of people will get jobs by themselves. We will hire a few of them through this tech consulting business. And then the third channel or the third bracket is this entrepreneurship side, right? So we do have an entrepreneurship program, which we're calling ALX Ventures. So a lot of the guys there are very many people who graduate from our software engineering program or our data program, and they have their ideas, they don't want to be employed, they want to start their businesses. So they can sign up for the Founder Academy. And within the Founder Academy, within ALX Ventures, we help them think through the idea, we help them refine it. We help them to come up with their prototype, then they go on to work on their MVP, they're given feedback, they go to market, they test it, they iterate. Once they've gotten their first few paying customers, then we invite them to join the incubator, or the accelerator, rather.
Okay.
And so the accelerator is an interesting space where, we expose them to people who can actually fund their businesses. So at this point, they're already cash flow positive, they're generating money, but they need to scale whatever it is that they're doing, or they need access to new markets, or they basically need connections, right? They need funding for their businesses. They will need to hire a lot more specialized talent.
Correct.
And so the accelerator is really there to help them with those kind of specialized needs that they may have. So as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, our objective by 2030 is to create 2 million jobs.
Correct.
And entrepreneurship is a fundamental way of doing that.
Correct.
Right? If I train 100,000 people and 100,000 people get jobs, that's 100,000 jobs I've created. But imagine if I created, say, 10,000 entrepreneurs, and then those entrepreneurs built businesses, which 5 years from now went ahead to hire 100 more people each. There's a multiplier effect.
Correct.
And so within our ecosystem, we really see entrepreneurship as a core part of this creating jobs. And we've really invested quite a bit into, making sure that our learners have all the resources that they need to really build their businesses. Graduation from ALX Ventures is not, I've gotten a certificate or I have a piece of paper.
The papers.
I've launched my business.
Yeah, that's a big shift from the sort of the status quo. What are some of the challenges you faced here? Just building this model. I think you're doing hard things as we're hearing. This 100,000 students or graduates this year. But also, when I think about it, I imagine that in many ways you're breaking new ground. You're probably doing unprecedented things all the time. So how are you dealing with some of those challenges? How do you achieve more in your role here at ALX?
So, I think one of the biggest challenges that we've really had is learner retention. And so, for a lot of people who haven't been through the ALX model, at least when they sign up for a program, the first week or the first 2-3 weeks, it's usually a bit of a shock, right? You're used to going to a classroom. The professor comes in, they give you notes, you write. You don't engage with the content. You only wait until the end of the semester when you have to do a test or an exam.
Correct.
And that's when you cram everything. You write whatever it is that the professor gave you. You get your A, and then 2-3 weeks after the exam, you don't even remember what you did, right? And so there's a lot of people who come from that kind of background, and then it's a bit of a shock when from the first week you have to deliver on a project.
And you're building on
and
everything.
It's building on week on week on week on week.
So you don't have any rest time, basically.
So there's no, I'm going to chill throughout the semester and then at the end of it, I'm going to do an exam. No, it's like...
It's always on,
It's continuous and it's always on. So there are many people who adapt to that, but there are some people who struggle to adapt to that. And they're just like, this is not my thing. So obviously, there's a lot of things that we do to support people, right? So a lot of the support that we give them is through community. Like you can come to our hubs, you can interact with your cohort mates, you can share experiences, you can talk to someone from ALX. A problem shared is a problem half solved. And there's a lot of, I usually joke with people, there's a lot of consolation when you realize you're not the only one struggling or suffering. You can see the other people who are struggling with you. And so there's a lot of help that goes through the community that we try to build among our learners that really helps them to adapt to the new way of thinking and to the new way of doing things. But that's been one major challenge that we've really faced. Another one which we've also tried to solve, as I was mentioning to you before, is a lot of people sign up for our programs and they don't have laptops or they don't have access to internet and they don't have a space. And so we actually set up these hubs to kind of like help them have an environment where it's conducive for learning, they have access to the internet, and they can really have that peace of mind for them to study.
So going forward, what sort of new initiatives and programs can we expect from ALX?
So coming into this year, we're going to be launching a 3-year program. So
wow.
I didn't mention it before, but a majority of people who come through our program right now between the ages of 23 and 27.
Okay.
So these are guys who are already in campus. They're looking to upskill so that they can get a job or they can thrive at their workplace. Or the people who've already graduated and they're looking for a job and they want to get into tech or they want to get into data science or some of these things. Or the people who are young professionals, right? And they're looking to level up. But we've constantly been asking ourselves, how do we attract a much younger audience? So how do you attract
the high schoolers and stuff?
18, 19-year-olds, guys who just finished high school, they haven't gone to campus, fresh slate. And so we thought, look, this 6-month boot camps or 4-month, 5-month boot camps might not be the exact environment for that type of profile. And so we're thinking, okay, fine, can we come up with, for software engineering, for example, can we come up with a 3-year program where it's a much healthier pace. It's not as fast paced as the 1-year program. It's a much healthier pace, and these learners have more campus type experience. They have a lot more time to engage with the content, and you're going to mix it up with a couple of things. So if it's software engineering, for example, we're going to mix it up as well with the ALX Ventures program, where they actually go in depth into what does it take to build a product, what does it take to build a business.
It's almost really end to end, huh?
Exactly. And so that's really what you're thinking. We're also thinking of getting into creative media space.
Oh, okay.
I think there's a lot of interesting things that can be done there, and the market is quite big. And so if you think about, creative media for digital marketing or for content development. And so we're going to be launching, hopefully at some point this year, something along the lines of creative digital media. And we're really excited about that because, it's kind of like the intersection of tech and entertainment, right, and creativity. So it's bringing creatives together with tech. And so that's really exciting for this year.
That's profound. I mean, that almost starts to sound like you're going to be producing the employees I need.
Yes.
Yeah, in a holistic way. So it's almost like this, you mentioned earlier in our conversation about the almost like an ALX or Africa Leadership University. It almost feels like it's manifesting itself in this new 3-year program, so to speak, right?
Exactly. It's a very similar type experience, but obviously we want to deliver it to a much bigger audience, a much bigger scale, right here at home. And so, we are hoping to basically give access to that world-class education to the biggest number of people.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about collaborations and partnerships. What sort of partnerships and collaborations have you had to put in place to make what ALX does actually possible?
I think the biggest partnership we have is with the MasterCard Foundation. And, our objectives are aligned. Through the Young Africa Works, MasterCard have this grand vision.
I know, I work with them as well.
Exactly, of creating jobs on the African continent. And so, our vision of creating 2 million jobs on the African continent by 2030 really fit into that objective. And so they are our biggest partners in that sense, and we're really working together towards, building those the infrastructure that we need to be able to create those kinds of jobs. Obviously, within the tech ecosystem, we've partnered with a number of people, right? We have a Salesforce program. We've partnered with Salesforce itself, and the way they are thinking about it, they're seeing a lot of jobs opening up in that space, and so we are kind of like training people to fit into the jobs that they are seeing being created into that space. And it's a very similar case with AWS as well. They're seeing a lot of demand, for AWS, either solutions architects or people to deliver, cloud migrations and whatnot. And so, but then there's a gap in terms of how fast that talent is being produced in the world, and they project in the marketplace. And so we've partnered with them to offer this program because they want us to help them to fill that gap. So we work with partners like this to help us, scale what we do, obviously, giving this kind of skill sets that are needed in the marketplace, and hopefully, get uptake at the end of it once people graduate.
And these are global jobs, right? It's not just in Kenya or East Africa or Africa.
Yeah,
these are global jobs, right?
The labor marketplace has become global, right? And COVID really accelerated that. And so if I'm building a company today, if I can't find a specific skill set in Kenya, why cannot hire it from South Africa, for example? Or why not, if I can get it cheaper from India, why not, right? And so, people have to think, and we encourage our learners to think that they're not, competing for jobs in Kenya. They're competing for jobs across the world.
Yeah.
And so they have to meet the bar of software engineers in the US, or they have to meet the bar of data scientists in Germany, right? It's a global marketplace.
Great. What advice would you give a young Kenyan, a young African today pursuing a career in technology or even technology entrepreneurship?
I'd encourage them to be optimistic. I'd encourage them to be curious. As it is now, there's a lot of naysayers and doom foreseers who are like, okay, fine, artificial intelligence is here, it's going to take jobs, there's no point, and it's very easy to just sit down and do nothing. But the thing is, there's a lot of opportunities that are going to be created by the changes that we are seeing. And the people who are building now, or the people who are working now, are the people who are going to take advantage. It's said that depressions create more billionaires than, during peace time, so to speak, right? The people who build during depressions are the people who come out on top once the depression is over. And so for young people, I just say, stay curious, stay hungry, as Steve Jobs would say. Stay hungry, stay foolish, keep learning, keep experimenting, follow your passion. People have said this ad nauseum, but I can't emphasize it enough. It's very important for you to discover your why and what really makes you tick. Because that's really what makes you you. What the world needs is you. Wow. So don't think of appearing as someone else, or you've seen someone else doing something. No, the world needs you.
Be the authentic self.
Be your authentic. The world needs your authentic self.
Yeah. How are you guys, and this is something that's sort of been in the back of my mind this whole conversation, keeping pace with all these transitions. You mentioned Salesforce, AWS. I almost imagine soon you probably have a program for NVIDIA. I know they have a Coda program that they have millions of developers on. These are the skills that the world needs. How are you guys keeping up with this relentless pace of innovation and sort of technology evolution that's happening around this space?
So I think the beautiful thing is that we have a two-sided business, right? So on the one hand, you have ALX, which is training young African in-demand skills in the marketplace, especially in tech. But on the other side, as I mentioned, we have what we call Sun Technologies, which is our B2B business. We are a tech consulting company, and we offer end-to-end tech solutions to our clients. So through the tech services business, we are really at the forefront of getting a sense of what challenges a company facing. What are they thinking about? So like right now, everybody's thinking about AI, right?
Correct.
How do I automate my workflows using AI, right? How do I automate the normal mundane things of every day, to do things faster, to save on costs and all these things. And so for us, we are seeing these things as they happen. And we have a very quick process of getting back and saying, okay, fine. In our curriculum, are we preparing our people, our talents, to be able to thrive in this marketplace, right? And so I think we are very advantageous in the sense that we're kind of like at the front seat of the changes happening at industry, and we're able to work very quickly, work backwards to redesign our programs to really fit what's happening in the marketplace.
So basically making sure that your programs are compatible with this market reality going forward.
Exactly.
Yeah. And, sort of as we come to the end of our conversation, I'd like to ask you one question about you. You're the general manager for ALX Africa here in Kenya. What are the things that drew you to this position, and how is that going so far?
So I think the one thing that I really enjoy about what I do is that we live in a very entrepreneurial work environment, right? And so as I mentioned earlier, the challenges that we have currently, it's not, what you're trying to do has not been done before. Right?
You're breaking new ground everywhere.
It's breaking new ground. It's figuring things from first principles. It's building from the ground up. And I think I've always been attracted to environments where that's happening, right? And so it's an environment which really values people who come with ideas and people who think, rather than an environment that values experience, right? And so, in our environment, the people who thrive are not people who come with tons and tons of experience. Because you might have a ton of experience, but what you have experienced doing is not what you're trying to do. We're trying to kind of like break out of what's been done before. And so someone who comes with fixed ideas, it's very difficult to do what we do, because you already have a certain sense of like, this is how this thing has to be done, right? And so for me, like what really, I would say feeds my spirit is that it's an open field, it's green field. We know what the problem is, it's big enough. We are ambitious about solving it, and it's really up to us to figure out, okay, fine, what do we try, what do we experiment with, and there's a lot of latitude to try out different things, to experiment. If you were to ask me what really attracted me here, I would really say is that grand vision that Fred has for education on the continent. He has a couple of TED Talks where he talks about this, transforming the continent through developing ethical and entrepreneurial leaders. It's something that really resonated with me. It's something I've always had an interest in. And I'd really say that's really what attracted me in.
So basically you're here to transform Africa.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Lastly, any final parting words you'd have for our audience, any nuggets that you might want to share as we bring our conversation to an end?
So I think for me, it's just to, if you're a learner or you're a potential learner, right, you're thinking about what does my career in tech look like, or what does my career in general look like? I'd really encourage you to, reach out to us, visit us, come and learn more about what we do. There's room for a lot of different types of people at ALX. So ALX is not just for like hardcore coders. Obviously we have those, but in essence, what you are teaching people to do is problem solving. So if you're passionate about problems, you're passionate about building, about creating, ALX would be a very, very good home for you. And if you're out there and you're a corporate or you're in business, you're in tech, there's lots of ways we can partner to really deliver the kind of impact you're trying to deliver. We have a very big, audacious goal, and we cannot do it ourselves. And so we are always keen to partner and to work with other people. And so we are very, very open to that.
Well, Peter, thank you so much for sharing your story. Also, what ALX is doing. I think there's so much I've learned about what you do. I don't think I quite appreciated the scale and the audacity of what you're trying to do here, but it's really exciting, and I'm seeing the impact you're having on the ground. And again, education, especially enabled through technology, is something for me that's a topic that's also close to my heart. So asante sana for sharing, and we really wish you all the best, as well as ALX, in terms of your big, hairy, audacious goals across the African continent.
It was a pleasure to chat with you and to share our ideas, and I'm looking forward to doing this again.
So thank you so much for watching this edition of the Pure Digital Passion podcast with our guest, Peter Muriithi. And we're hoping that you'll join us for the next conversation, where we'll talk about all the things that converge technology, business, and exciting prospects across Kenya and the African continent. Thank you so much, and we'll catch you in the next one.